Paper. In Chinese, 纸. Now, hold on. What was everyone else using before paper? Well, less than 1,000 years ago, the Western world was still writing on very thin pieces of stretched leather. Yeah, that's what parchment actually is. Not very cheap, not very humane. Before that, the Egyptians were using papyrus, which was basically thin strands of grass fibers individually glued together into a whole sheet. Cheaper, sure, but imagine the labor involved in that. And before that, everyone was just chiseling lines onto rocks and big stones. How did the ancient Chinese come up with paper then? Well, all the way back in the Han Dynasty, there was a court official named Cai Lun, who was very well known for being honest, cautious, a good judge of character, and being really good at making things. He was such a solid and upright dude that not only was he the top dog of the eunuchs with the fattest salary, even when a coup d'etat happened within the court, he remained absolutely unaffected because he was respected by literally everybody on all sides. Well, in the year 105, he went to the emperor with a proposal. You see, back then, the most common writing material was bamboo. Bamboo's heavy. There was also silk. That was really expensive. Now, he had come up with a recipe for a cheap and easy paper. Pound and stir tree bark, plant fibers, and hemp waste in water. Yes, he was already recycling. Flatten out the resulting pulpy mixture to a dry, thin piece of paper. Voila, affordable, sustainable. And just like that, the dude became a legend. But if you notice, I specifically said cheap and easy paper, because here's a real fact that will most likely blow your mind, because it definitely blew mine. You see, there's a little scrap of paper, clearly a map of some kind, that they found in a tomb in 2006. And guess what? That piece of paper was dated to around 179 BC. That's over 200 years before Cai Lun came up with his formula. Later excavations across China also uncovered other bits of paper from the years after that, meaning that little scrap of map wasn't a fluke. China clearly knew how to make paper a long time ago. We can only assume that maybe in the early days, it was just too much of a hassle to make, and Cai Lun's real achievement was figuring out how to make it easy and economical. With this democratization of papermaking, so to speak, it was now accessible enough for people to further innovate on the process and the raw materials for greater efficiency and higher quality papers. Using such bark from the mulberry tree for sustainability and incorporating bamboo fibers when mulberry bark production couldn't keep up, and creating smoother, glossier, and even stretchy paper. And so, thanks to Cai Lun's ingenuity, not only did China have a head start on papermaking, they would be way ahead of the curve for the next 1,000 years to come, because these techniques would only make it to the Middle East via the Silk Road in around 700 AD, and then to Europe in around 1100 AD. With paper itself experiencing such a technological boom, the Chinese, as they do, also went wild, coming up with tons of practical inventions out of this new material. One of them was the paper cup. Yeah, the same paper cups. We now need all of those icky, non-biodegradable plastic coatings to prevent them from disintegrating into a soggy mess. Funny thing is, much like the origin of paper, the Chinese didn't think this was a big deal, because there's no actual record of this even being invented. The first time paper cups were mentioned was in the Tang Dynasty some 500 years later. But apparently at that point, the cups were already being made in various colors and used for casual tea drinking. Totally not groundbreaking at all. They had it for a really long time already. It's just nobody brought it up. But how did they make it work then? Presumably, they achieved water resistance by just making the cups with tougher, thicker paper and then coated them with the wholly biodegradable material that is wax. Simple, smart, and greener than what we use now. So now that we have disposable cups, what's the next logical step? Disposable money, obviously. You see, the Tang Dynasty was China's greatest golden age, and with all the wealth that was flying around, merchants got really fed up with having to deal with lots of heavy coins for all their big business deals. And being the clever capitalists that they were, they found an efficient alternative by instead using pieces of paper mutually approved value to trade amongst themselves, kind of like an old school Bitcoin. This marked the first appearance of paper money in history, and much like the talk of centralized federal digital currency these days, the government of the subsequent Song dynasty ran with the idea in the 1120s and started printing the first official paper currency in the world, using the woodblock printing tech that China also invented. These inventions just keep coming. And guess what? There's more. And I've saved the best for last. Not only did the Chinese invent one of the most important materials in all of history, they were also the first to wipe their rear ends with it. That's right, it's time to talk about TP. Even before the Tang Dynasty, paper was already cheap, accessible, and common enough to be produced specifically for the disposal of human waste. And with the reoccurring theme of the Chinese inventing things with little to no fanfare, the same was true for toilet paper. The first time it's ever mentioned is in 589 during the Sui dynasty, which came before the Tang dynasty. Scholar Yan Zhitui wrote, "Paper on which there are quotations or commentaries from the 5 classics or the names of sages I dare not use for toilet purposes." That's it. The first recorded history of toilet paper was the ancient equivalent of an offhand comment on Twitter. Sorry, I mean X. But by the 1300s, there was organized, quantified record keeping of toilet paper production. Factories in what is now Zhejiang province were making 10 million packages of a few thousand sheets every year. By the end of the century, 720,000 sheets were produced for the imperial court alone, with 15,000 ultra-soft, specially perfumed sheets made specifically for the imperial family. In 1393, in the meantime, the rest of the world was still using sticks and stones and soggy sponges. I don't know what they're using. It wasn't until the 1600s that Europeans began to use scrap paper as toilet paper, and it wasn't until 1857 that toilet paper was introduced as a commercially available product initially in the United States. And that's the surprisingly ancient and curious, quirky history of how China came up with and intensely innovated one of the most important materials of our everyday lives and the entire modern world. Imagine if your tax forms were still delivered on stone tablets and you had to read War and Peace on bamboo, not to mention running the risk of wiping the old bum with some poison ivy every time you had to do a number 2. What other unexpected inventions should we talk about? Let me know in the comments below. And the next time you go to Taco Bell, remember that the cash you used to pay for those tacos, the cup that your Baja Blast is in, the toilet paper you used for the inevitable consequences, and even the wad of napkins you needed to clean up the sauce that dripped everywhere was all thanks to the ancient Chinese. Yeah, they invented napkins too. All right, see you next time. 再见。